So only one emergency medical team managed to reach Kamal Adwan Hospital on December 1st for the first time in 60 days. And then a few days later, that hospital was heavily bombed with no previous warning, killing 4 health workers, and the medical team was ordered to leave.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Tjada D'Oyen McKenna is a veteran humanitarian official who now leads Mercy Corps, a major international NGO that provides relief in disaster zones. This includes Gaza and Syria. Since the outbreak of the conflict in Gaza in October 2023, I've periodically checked in with her to discuss the challenges of meeting the needs of Gazans trapped and displaced by the conflict. And over this period, the dynamics of getting aid into Gaza have largely not changed. There are still significant bureaucratic obstacles set in place by the Israeli government, which controls the flow of aid. And there's also no meaningful de-confliction mechanism, which would let humanitarian aid groups travel through Gaza without fear of being attacked by warring parties. All the while, the situation in Gaza is getting more dire by the day, despite new signals that a ceasefire may soon be reached. In Syria, the situation has obviously changed dramatically over the last several weeks, so we discuss how Mercy Corps intends to expand its aid operations as the new de facto authorities consolidate power in Damascus. This conversation gives you a really good insight and understanding into how a large international NGO is responding to two of the more complex humanitarian emergencies on the planet today. I'm always thankful for speaking with Tjada D'Oyen McKenna. I learned a lot from this episode, and I suspect you will as well. I am excited for what we have in store for the show in the coming year, and I'm so thankful for all of you who have stuck with this show for so long. Believe it or not, 2025 will be this podcast's 13th year of existence, which is like a century in podcast years. Back when I started the show in 2012, I had to explain to people what a podcast was. Now we are slowly taking over the world, apparently. Anyway, thank you all for being with me for so long. You can show your support by getting a paid subscription via globaldispatches.org. I appreciate it. Now here is my conversation with Tjada D'Oyen McKenna, CEO of Mercy Corps. Tjada, thank you again for coming back on Global Dispatches to discuss yet another humanitarian crisis. I would love to have you give listeners just a broad overview of the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza as things stand in late December 2024.
As of late December 2024, what we know about Gaza and what has happened is that estimated 45,000 Palestinians have been killed. 70% of those are women and children. We know that over 106,000 people have been injured. 70% of all the housing has been destroyed. We know that in terms of aid, getting in an average of 65 aid trucks a day has crossed into Gaza, and the UN says that 600 trucks a day is needed for a sufficient response.
So about 10% of required aid is coming in at this point.
Yes, and that's an average, right? So there are days where there's probably none and days where there's more, but that average of 65 is very telling across this conflict. We also know that 90% of the population, so about 1.9 million people, have been displaced multiple times. And 80% of the territory remains under forced evacuation orders. So you have a population that's been forced to move several times and increasingly crowded into smaller and smaller places. In terms of people's ability to get help, in terms of hospitals functioning in Gaza, we know that only 15 out of 36 are partially functioning and able to admit new patients. And the UN flash appeal, which was around 1.2 billion, is 71% funded. So Gaza remains a heartbreaking humanitarian situation, mostly man-made and mostly due to issues of access.
So I wanted to ask you about issues of access. I mean, this has been a persistent problem since the outbreak of this conflict over a year ago. How has barriers to access changed over that period of time? Initially, and I think it was when you and I spoke probably about a year ago, the key barrier to access was bureaucratic obstructionism by the Israeli government. Has that changed? And are there other barriers now that are contributing potentially as equally to limiting access to humanitarian aid?
That has not changed. In fact, it may have worsened at some point. We recently reached an all-time low since the conflict started, with really limited amounts reaching, especially the northern areas of Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah. The other thing, relentless hostilities in terms of bombing, shelling, active humanitarian convoys being bombed, still the logistical barriers. Also, over time, shortages in fuel and commodities and medical supplies, like routinely expiring at borders or not being able to get in, has just made it impossible. And the situation now on the ground, it's just desperate, right? So, this lack of aid and commercial vehicles is creating this environment of scarcity amidst this overwhelming demand, making it really volatile. Prices of goods have soared. We're hearing reports of 25-kilo bags of flour in central Gaza being priced at 245 US dollars.
What would that be compared to like in normal times?
I can't imagine it's any more than like $40 at the high end in normal times. So I could be wrong, but it's just, we've heard the prices have gone up to tens or even hundreds of times from original prices, or kind of the variances that we've seen and documented. It's been really tough. And even when people are operating in Gaza, they're made to feel increasingly just very insecure. There's no real safety or de-confliction mechanism at all.
Yeah, I mean, still, even after all this time, no proper deconfliction mechanism, which refers to the ability of humanitarian agencies like yours to speak directly to the warring parties, Israel and Hamas, in order to get aid and make sure that humanitarian convoys are not attacked. That still, after this long while, does not work properly. Why?
No, it doesn't work properly. It feels willful. It's something that we've managed to have and be functional in everywhere else. I can't say for sure definitively.
Mhm. One thing that seems to have changed over the last few months, at least, is the frequency with which I'm seeing reports of essentially like looting of humanitarian convoys. And I think likely that's because of the scarcity that you just described has been just exacerbated by this prolonged conflict. You didn't really see those reports of looting at the very early stages of this conflict, or even over most of the last, first year of this conflict. But now you're seeing more and more stories, at least I am, of these convoys being taken before they're properly distributed of their aid.
Yes. And it's not clear who's doing the looting or how organized or systemic it is, but that has certainly remained an issue. And just our own access to our own warehouses and facilities, it leaves it more open. It leaves you more vulnerable to that looting.
So, can you describe your activities in Gaza today?
So to date, we're providing emergency cash, food, and hygiene kits and psychosocial support for young people and their caregivers during well-being sessions. Obviously, it's a very traumatized population and still trying to engage around mentoring and youth sports activities. Since October of 2023, we've been able to reach nearly 200,000 people with emergency food items, hygiene and shelter kits, about 129,000 people with emergency cash assistance, and we're able to reach 6,000 participants through some of those psychosocial support and interventions and sports interventions with youth. We, like all other organizations, have had a lot of issues getting our aid in. There's just so much more we could be doing that we want to be doing, but with the issues getting aid in and then the ability of people to move around when so much of the territory is under forced evacuation orders, and even where when people can move or places that should be safe have not been safe.
And are you operating at all in northern Gaza, which seems to be under the most intense humanitarian crisis and where large swaths of the population are inaccessible, at least apparently, to most humanitarian services?
Yeah. There were 41 attempts by the UN to deliver aid in North Gaza in November. And all 41 of those attempts were either denied or there were four that were impeded. So only one emergency medical team managed to reach Kamal Adwan Hospital on December 1st for the first time in 60 days. And then a few days later, that hospital was heavily bombed with no previous warning, killing four health workers, and the medical team was ordered to leave. So we were operating in North Gaza until October 6th, when we were forced to leave due to displacement orders and ongoing hostilities. So, no, at this time, we are not currently active in northern Gaza, but it has been made virtually impossible for any of us to be doing real work in northern Gaza.
Like, why is that? Why is northern Gaza so particularly dire at the moment?
In North Gaza, like, the shelling is constant. The displacement has been constant. It has not been safe, and all access to it has been blocked off in terms of getting goods in or out. And movement in that area has just been severely restricted and limited. And most of it is under evacuation orders right now. So the people that are there are suffering tremendously, and they're choked off from everything.
So, as we speak, there's yet another round of discussions on a potential ceasefire. I think like CIA Director Bill Burns is in the region. He's been the US point person on these ceasefire talks. And we've seen this kind of play out before, but at least at the moment, there seems to be a modicum of progress towards a ceasefire. We don't know how that will shake out. But if there is a ceasefire, how would that impact your humanitarian operations?
From the beginning, we've been calling for a ceasefire to get aid into the territory and to allow the movement of that aid and to allow to get some real support to people. So a ceasefire remains an important goal and really remains the only safe way for us to deliver assistance at scale. And you basically have over 90% of the population needing assistance to survive.
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be this like sense that, humanitarian access is pegged to a ceasefire, but that like need not be the case. There are plenty of hot conflicts around the world in which you do have these kind of de-confliction mechanisms that you discussed.
I mean, this is also a unique context in that it's a really small geographical area that you're talking about. Those methods aren't working, and you basically have the entire population in need of this kind of assistance at scale at this point. So, if there had been real safe zones and reliable things getting in, we could have set things up. But at this point, the scale of the need is so large, the infrastructure is so badly damaged, and the situations have been so dire for so long, you would need that ceasefire and some protections to operate.
So if there is a ceasefire, like how would Mercy Corps scale up its operations? And more broadly, how might the humanitarian community scale up its operations? Like, is this like a kind of a plug and play system? Like, are you just kind of ready to go?
In terms of supply, like getting supplies, and there's been such a backlog of supplies coming in that we would have to get supplies in. But the other things that we need that have not been there, and this is because it's been operating under a complete siege, you need water, you need fuel to get around, you need communication points. And so much of the infrastructure has been damaged at this point, particularly around water provision, that I think there would have to be some short-term rebuilding to the best extent that you can. But what you can do is still going to be hampered and slowed down by the lack of infrastructure, including just like safe buildings and warehouses and roads being destroyed and housing being destroyed and water ports being destroyed. It will be hampered. It will probably be slower than it would have to be otherwise, but there needs to be this prolonged period of access and some real commitment to getting some basic things back up and running.
Could I just switch gears really briefly in the last couple of minutes and ask you about Syria?
Yes.
Mercy Corps has operations ongoing in Syria. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
Can you describe those?
Yeah, Mercy Corps, we've been in Syria since 2008. So currently, we have team members in Northwest and Northeast Syria working to deliver essential support. Like, according to our current assessments, and obviously we're talking to the team every day and trying to figure things out, we understand that 21 out of the 53 camps in those areas have received new arrivals following the recent escalations and conflicts, but we are one of the primary suppliers of services to 45 camps in Northwest Syria. And our work there includes things like water trucking, garbage bins, basic sanitation work, hygiene kit distribution to newly arriving households, and assistance to families to help cover their essential expenses, like including food for those new displaced arrivals.
So, if you are running so many camps and providing so much aid in many camps in northwest Syria, can I presume that this was an area largely under the control of HTS, now the de facto authorities in all of Syria?
Yes, it was not under Assad government control.
So, I mean, that's interesting to me that you have the group that's now the de facto authorities of all of Syria that was clearly working with international NGOs, international humanitarian organizations for many years. So there are like mechanisms of cooperation in place between HTS and the international humanitarian community, international NGOs.
Yeah, that there are mechanisms and there are controls in place to make sure that we all stay within the confines of different terrorist and prohibited party prescriptions. But there has been an access route for us to provide unimpeded aid in authorized ways to populations in need.
So you've been the primary aid service delivery entity in many camps in northwest Syria for so long. Do you have plans to expand across other parts of Syria?
Yes, we would like to. I think we all would like to be able to be in Damascus, where many of us have not been able to be for a long time to support the needs there. We want to go where there are needs, and that extends to other parts of Syria. So I think we're eager to try to broaden our footprint there and to support this population through this time of transition.
What would enable you to get to Damascus?
I think it's still such an evolving situation right now. It's been such a huge power shift. There are a lot of refugees returning to their homes, like trying to see how markets work and really just getting a sense of how things will be set up and how international governments are going to approach these new territories. So I think we're all trying to lay the groundwork and do what we can while some official systems and protocols become clearer.
The fact that HTS is still a proscribed terrorist organization by the US government probably complicates these efforts.
That does complicate things. And I think that also rises to the sense of us just trying to make sure that we understand the parameters under which we can operate.
Are there any like parting thoughts or anything else you want to mention or discuss before we conclude?
I think that in terms of Syria, it's still too soon to tell, but Syrians are embarking on this really transformative new chapter. It's filled with immense challenges and opportunity, but we also have to keep in mind there's still high ongoing conflict and volatility continues in different regions of Syria, especially the Northeast. So there still are very real urgent humanitarian needs that must be met and need a sustained commitment.
Yeah, it's not like the war is fully over. And as you said, there still are just these kind of dire humanitarian needs. I keep getting these updates from OCHA, the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And things are from a humanitarian perspective, still quite dire.
Still quite dire. And I think there's just been a lot of movement, as you would expect, both ways in and out of Syria. So things are still settling in. So while the regime change provides opportunities and some hope, it's still just a very complex, ongoing situation. And we have to make sure that people don't lose sight of that.
Tjada, thank you so much for your time as always.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.